We are live.
Welcome. I call the Finance Committee to order. Madam Clerk, has the roll call been taken?
Yes, it has.
Thank you. Members of the committee, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest that are in the items appealing on today's agenda? Seeing none. Items considering for separation. Prior to separating the items for discussion, please note that item 5.2.1, review of the finance policy 0.010, use of casino funds and second quarter casino update 2023-297 is separated as there is a presentation and delegation associated with this item. So, Councilor Caputo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to separate 523 and 525, just for discussion, please.
Any further? Mayor Davis.
524 and 5.31.
May I please have a mover and a seconder for all items for consideration, consent items not separated for discussion purposes? Councilor Caputo, seconded by Mayor Davis. With no further separations, I will now call the vote on all items considered in consent items that were not separated for discussion purposes.
Thank you. All those items that are subject to the vote are item 5.2.2, 2023 capacities on designated public institutions, 5.3.2 quarterly status report of contracts awarded, 5.3.3 treasurer semi-annual investment report for 2023, and 5.3.4 the minutes. All those in favor?
Thank you. There is one presentation and delegate on tonight's agenda. We will begin with the delegation. Beth Gurney, may you please come to the front? Jason Kuhlman and Heidi Northwood. Wilfred Laurier, please come forward to speak to item 5.2.1, the review of the finance policy 010, use of casino funds and second quarter casino update, financial impact of $1,379,904 revenue from 2023-297. You will have 10 minutes to present, inclusive of all questions. Go ahead, please state where you're from.
Is it on? There we go. Okay, thank you. Chair Sullivan, members of council, guests in the chamber, thank you for having us this evening. My name is Beth Gurney and I'm the interim senior executive officer at Wilfrid Laurier University's Brantford campus. Joining me this evening is Dr. Heidi Northwood, our provost and vice president academic. Prior to becoming provost, Dr. Northwood was our senior executive officer and led a great deal of the groundwork for this project. Also joining us is Jason Kuhlman. Jason is our Vice President of Advancement and External Relations, overseeing fundraising, communications, marketing, and alumni relations across the institution. So as the report before you suggests, we're seeking the city's support to make the vision for a cultural hub in One Market a reality. Doing so would fill a longstanding gap in the community's cultural infrastructure and generate increased activity in the city's core 12 months of the year. Thanks to the city's support, we were able to engage Seidler Architects to generate drawings to bring to life the vision of what a community cultural hub in One Market might look like. And for the benefit of those in the gallery, I have included some of those in our presentation. As the recent example of the Laurier Brantford YMCA demonstrates, an initiative of this scale is best completed when done through collaboration. By collaborating with partners like the university, YMCA, federal, provincial governments, corporate and private donors, the city of Brantford played an important role in the creation of an asset in the Laurier Brantford YMCA that will serve the well-being of Brantfordians for generations to come. As the city's funding commitment to the Laurier Brantford YMCA comes to fulfillment in 2025, we kindly request that you consider redirecting those funds on a go-forward basis toward the community cultural hub. As has been shared in this and other reports, the community cultural hub would be located in the former cinemas on the upper level of One Market. featuring a 250-seat live performance theater, a 100-seat repertory cinema, a gallery space, and cafe. The Community Cultural Hub would fill an unmet community need that has been formally identified since the 1970s and that was unanimously confirmed as still unmet in the city's 2019 mid-sized performance space feasibility feasibility study. In addition to providing much needed access to space for the arts and cultural groups in the community, the Cultural Hub would support enhanced vibrancy, safety, revitalization of downtown, providing social, economic, and cultural benefits. The Cultural Hub would also serve alongside the presence of assets like the Sanderson Center, the Brantford Bulldogs at the Civic Center, and Harmony Square to create an entertainment district in our city's core. It would add incredible value to the quality of life for those who choose to live, work, study, and play in our city, and enhance the appeal of the many residential developments currently being planned for the downtown area. We come to you today with significant research, consultation, stakeholder engagement, including local dance studios and performing arts groups, confident that this proposal meets the needs of the community in an effective and cost-efficient way. Laurier has already made significant investment into enhancing One Market. The university is committed to the Community Cultural Hub project and grateful for the support shown by the city to date. Your support at this stage is critical as we move into the next phase. A project of this size will be made better and more feasible if we work together to bring this incredible opportunity to life. Thank you for the opportunity, and we welcome any questions.
Thank you. Do any members of the committee have questions? Seeing none? Okay, we're going to deal with this item shortly.
Thank you.
I would now ask that Judy Moore, Director of Finance, come and speak to 5.2.1.
Thank you, Chair Sullivan. Joelle Daniels, Commissioner of Corporate Services and City Treasurer. I just want to take the opportunity to introduce Judy to the committee. I think you both do know Judy most recently from her work on the multi-year budget process, but this is her first Finance Committee meeting as the city's Director of Finance. So just wanted to make that announcement. And then Judy's going to do the casino presentation.
Thanks, Joelle. Appreciate that very much. So Judy Moore, Director of Finance. So Chair and members of the Finance Committee, thank you for the opportunity to present to you today on Finance Policy 10, the use of casino funds. So our current policy was approved in 2015 and it was last reviewed in 2019. This policy requires the review of an ongoing commitments that were previously approved by council in the first year of each new council term, which is the reason for this presentation and the related report. The current policy also approved the allocation of all casino funds received to the following 6 categories. Cultural and built heritage receives 5% of revenues, disaster mitigation for 5%, council priorities receives 10%, capital contribution receives 20%, community group funding receives 25%, and legacy projects receives 35%. The policy further outlines that the principles and legacy projects shall be guided by, which are cultural, sports, socioeconomic, community health, environmental, economic development, arts, and education. So next we'll review each allocation under the current policy. Starting with the cultural and built heritage, the current allocation to this is 5% of annual revenues. So if we assume that we get annual receipts of $5 million, this would equate to an annual contribution of $250,000. The Cultural and Built Heritage Program was first established in 2017 with the intent to provide project grants to cultural organizations for facility and infrastructure improvements. Since 2017, this program has provided approximately $600,000 in grants to cultural organizations, including the Brant Historical Society, Canadian Military Heritage Museum, Glenhurst Art Gallery of Brant, Her Majesty's Royal Chapel of the Mohawks, and the Woodland Cultural Center. Staff are recommending that this 5% allocation continue in the policy. Next, we move to the disaster mitigation. The current allocation to the disaster mitigation is 5% of annual revenues. Again, assuming that our annual receipts are $5 million, this equates to an annual contribution of $250,000. This funding was previously used to fund unexpected costs associated with the February 2018 flood event. For large disasters, the city would apply to the Municipal Disaster Recovery Assistance, which is a claims-based program from the province. To be eligible, the cost of the disaster must be equal to 3% of the city's own purpose taxation levy, which would be about $5.475 million in 2023. This is the amount that would be our maximum exposure that the city would have to fund, and the province would fund disasters above this amount. It would take many years of this contribution to amount to anything tangible, and we already have a corporate contingency reserve that has a target balance of 1.5% of the levy, which for 2023 would be about $2.7 million. It is staff's recommendation that these funds be made available to fund other legacy projects and that the disaster mitigation reserve be closed. Council's priorities get a current allocation of 10% of annual revenues. If we assume that our annual receipts are $5 million, this equates to an annual contribution of $500,000. There are annual commitments that come from the council priorities category, which include $175,000 contribution to the Waterfront Master Plan land acquisition and development, and $2,500 contribution a year for the Remembrance Day Fly Pass. The remainder of this funding is available to be used by council for other priority projects. Staff are recommending that this allocation continue with the 10%. The current allocation for capital contribution is 20% of the annual revenues. Again, assuming that our annual receipts are $5 million, this equates to an annual contribution of $1 million. The capital funding envelope reserve is used to assist in funding our capital plan. The current contributions for capital also include approximately $3.2 million from the operating budget. The 2021 asset management plan had identified that there's a $21 million funding gap per year for the city's State of Good repair program. However, this only includes the city's core assets of roads, water, wastewater, bridges, and culverts. While more funds can always be used for the city's capital program, staff are recommending that the current 20% allocation continue. The current allocation to our community group funding is 25% of annual revenues. If we assume that our annual receipts are $5 million, this equates to an annual contribution of $1,250,000. There are annual commitments from this community group funding category, which include $110,000 contribution for physician recruitment, a contribution for annual arts grants in the amount of $158,470, which includes the museum funding agreements and annual operating agreements through the Community Cultural Investment Program. There's a $5,000 contribution for the Christmas Baskets program, $213,800 for other annual grants, which include the funding for Student Nutrition Program, Emergency Food Service, Seniors Resource Center, Victim Services of Brantford Food Bank, and DIVA. $100,000 is for the St. Joseph's Life Care Hospice Grant, which is set to continue until 2026, and $700,000 for the City of Brantford Grants Program. You'll note that the total of these annual commitments are slightly higher than the forecasted revenues. However, there is an opening operating surplus in this envelope to accommodate all the current commitments over this council term. Staff are recommending to continue with this 25% allocation. The current allocation to our legacy projects is 35% of annual revenues. If we assume again that our annual receipts are $5 million, this equates to an annual contribution of $1,750,000. Staff are recommending to increase this allocation to 40%, reallocating the 5% from the disaster mitigation to allow for the following contributions. A $250,000 initial annual contribution to the Hospital Redevelopment Reserve Fund, continuation of the $1,163,350 for the boundary agreement compensation, which will take us until 2027, at which time staff recommends that this amount be reallocated to the Hospital Redevelopment Reserve Fund. Continuation of the annual funding for the YMCA Laurier Athletic Complex until this funding term expires in 2025, at which time staff recommends approximately $635,000 be allocated to support the Wilfrid Laurier University Cultural Hub project for a period of 10 years from 2026 to 2035. Lastly, the contribution to the Public Art Reserve in the amount of $35,000 should continue with no change. With the changes proposed by staff, the allocations in the updated policy would be as follows: 5% for cultural and built heritage, 10% for council priorities, 20% for capital contribution, 25% for community group funding, and 40% for legacy projects. That's all I have for today. I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any members of the committee have any questions? Seeing none. I have a mover and seconder to put this item on the floor. Moved by Councillor Caputo. Seconded by Councillor Hunt. Call the vote. Sorry, would you like to have some discussion on this, Mayor Davis? I am asking.
Since you're asking. Yeah, a couple of points I wanted to make. First of all, I thank staff for reviewing our policy that's in place for how we use the casino proceeds. And I think what they've provided to us makes sense, that, some adjustments and reallocations. I like the fact that we continue to plan for what we know will be a very significant contribution towards a new hospital rebuild. And it's absolutely critical that we continue to do that so that the province eventually provides the final approval for that project. And then we're likely to do that if they see that one of the municipal partners is planning how it's going to be able to finance our share, which will be significant. In respect to the redirect for the small performing center at the facility that's now owned and operated by Laurier, I think this is an excellent opportunity for a couple of different reasons. One, the previous report from the task force for small performing center told us very clearly that there is a need to have a small performing center, much smaller than the Sanderson, and that will help to encourage the strengthening of our local cultural and arts scene and community. So I accept that. It was well presented in that task force report. The problem was for the city to develop such a center on its own. This was 3 years ago. The cost was estimated to be 50 million. I'm sure now that's 70 million or 75 million. And the operating cost would have been approaching $1 million. This is very affordable. For a fraction of that estimated cost, we'll be partners with Laurier in a facility that's in the downtown, making use of these cinemas that have kind of lain dormant now for at least 15, 20 years. So we're repurposing a space that's already been constructed. And I think it goes a long ways towards demonstrating our commitment to an ongoing beneficial partnership with Laurier Brantford, which has reaped many rewards and dividends for our community. We saw that on earlier this week when we were talking about memorandum of understanding for a vital signs report. That's an example of what we're doing with the division led by Dr. Popham. So it's a relationship that continues to deepen and strengthen, and this takes us further down that road. And I think is a clear signal from Laurier that we at the city are committed to making this partnership work for both of us and the students and the community, and also for Laurier to do the same with us. So for a lot of different reasons, I think it makes a lot of sense for us to approve the change in how we allocate the casino proceeds, and that we continue what will be going, what's going to the Y right now, and when that ends, that moving over to support the small performing arts center.
Councillor Caputo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also agree that I think this is absolutely fantastic. Great work, Judy, by the way. Bringing smaller venues to Laurier should alleviate some of the abilities that we actually have now with our Sanderson Center, in hopes that the challenge is now that we utilize the Sanderson Center to its maximum capabilities, and that is to bring some bigger type acts in order to help us with the downtown revitalization in terms of making it an entertainment district. I do have a question as well. I should have brought it up in the last one, but I'm going to take advantage of this. With hockey coming now, I mean, in another 3 weeks, we're going to have 3,000 people visiting the downtown core that hasn't been there in 40 years. Do we have a number or an anticipated number of what that legacy fund will actually grow to? Because now the casino should actually have with it an additional probably 150,000 footsteps that have the ability to get into the casino that wasn't there a year ago.
Through you, Chair Sullivan, to Councillor Caputo. It's difficult to anticipate what any sort of revenue generation from increased traffic in the downtown and how that's going to relate to the casino. The changes to this policy will see a 40% allocation towards the legacy component that we're currently holding in reserve for a lot of these legacy type projects. That dollar value on what we're currently seeing annually would be $2 million a year. I wish it was 200 million. $2 million annually, just the legacy component. But once we are receiving quarterly reports from the casino, and we do bring that report quarterly to this committee as well. So hopefully that increased traffic would maybe result in some increased revenues moving forward.
Thank you, Councillor Caputo. I too would like to chime in on this. I think this is a great opportunity for the downtown. It's going to give us like a 3-tier system between Laurier, Sanderson Center, and our newly renovated Civic Center. And I think there's nothing but blessings coming for downtown Brantford. Mayor Davis for a second time.
Councilor Caputo brings up a good point. And I thought staff in particular should know that when Mr. Hutchins and I had a meeting with representatives from Great Canadian Gaming and the OLG, it's about 6 weeks ago, I brought that up to the attention of Great Canadian Gaming, the impact that having the Bulldogs games, 34 of them, will likely have on the traffic going into the casino. They did undertake, and they thought it was a good idea to, they're going to try and measure through their own record keeping the specific impact of the home games on their attendance and their revenues. So I'm making note of that when we get the quarterly report to ask them for that further information as well.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, call the vote.
Assume this means in favor.
All those in favor? Thank you. That item carried.
Next, we'll move on to the item that Councillor Caputo wished to have separated, 5.2.3.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have an anticipated deficit this year. And certainly not something I was looking forward to, but I guess one of the questions I have to it is there any way to defer some of these losses over the next 4 years in our budget process? And I guess B, do we have any anticipated loss from any revenue generated through water usage? I mean, for the last several years, people have been watering their lawns consistently, but this summer I haven't touched my sprinkler system once. And I have the greenest and plushest lawn in the neighborhood. So I'm assuming there's going to be some kind of a loss, and I don't know if we even have anywhere near that number. But I guess that'd be my question. A, can we defer some losses? And B, do we have any anticipated number for water usage?
Through you, Chair Sullivan. So with respect to the first question, I do just want to caution that this is a second quarter forecast, and it's not, although it is where we're forecasting right now, it's really not unusual when staff are looking at their budgets and, still looking forward to the end of the year to be a bit conservative in sort of forecasting surpluses. It's easier to kind of forecast those deficits. So the chart that's actually on page 88, it does indicate in second quarter, in other years, we've kind of been in this situation, and most times we've been able to turn it around by the end of the year. So that is something that may happen. But however, given everything we know today, it's a possibility that may not happen. For a deficit this size, we are currently carrying an earmarked amount in our operating contingency reserve of $750,000. That was based on some previous council direction to keep that there. So if this was the end of the year, this is the situation we're in, we do have money earmarked to offset this deficit. Not that we're expecting significant deficit, but we are required under the Act that if we were in a deficit that we were unable to fund, we'd need to build that deficit into the following year's operating budget and either collect it through taxes. But hopefully we would be recommending that we would have sufficient reserves to offset a deficit of this size. With respect to your second point, sorry, I almost forgot about the water. I do just want to indicate this variance report really just focuses on the tax supported services. So that's why no mention of water in this report. But Selvi Congera, Director of Environmental Services, has indicated that there has been an approximate 5% reduction. But they're expected to be able to have offsetting expenditure decreases as well to mitigate that.
Thank you.
Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to staff. Joelle, the second quarter of last year, were we in a deficit position, and was it comparable?
Through you, Chair Sullivan, to Councillor Hunt. Last year at second quarter, we were not in a deficit position. At that time, we had received a number of one-time surplus items that we really weren't expecting. You might recall we had brought to the committee after that large surplus. Some of those one-time items, that we had received was dividends from the closeout of our utility companies on the merger with Grandbridge, as well as some WSIB premium rebates, as well as a large draw on our unrestricted deposit account with our benefit provider. All of that went into a large surplus at this time of the year last year, which ultimately we recommended to council. We use those funds to establish the Hospital Redevelopment Reserve Fund, and that's what we did later in the year. But looking back, in 2020 and the COVID years, very, very little surplus at this time of year. Only $124,000 was forecasted. And in the 2 years prior to that, we were about $900,000 forecasted in both years. In 2018, by the end of the year, we were in a surplus position. In 2019, we did end the year with a small $44,000 deficit.
Okay, and the employee gapping savings. So, which is the biggest analysis, or the almost 1.6 million. So I'm just looking at the explanation. We anticipated that would be 1.2 million. So is that we're $400,000 over with the employee gapping, or am I reading that wrong?
So what the report is indicating here is that we have a budgeted gapping savings of 2.8 million, but right now we're only tracking 1.2 million. So that's resulting in a 1.6 almost $1 million deficit currently. Again, gapping is one of those wild cards, is always subject to change. We can only base that number on what we know today as far as vacancies and not really anticipating future ones. Certainly one of those numbers we expect could probably improve between now and the end of the year.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Joelle.
Do I have a mover and a seconder to put this item on the floor? Moved by Councilor Caputo. Seconded by Councilor Hunt. Any further discussion? Seeing none, call the vote.
Thank you. All those in favor? Thank you. That item carries.
Okay. Mayor Davis, I believe you asked 5.2.4 to be separated.
I did, and I have two purposes. The first will be to direct, I believe, Judy Wong-Page, are you online? If you can pop up, please. There you are. So I just wanted to acknowledge this will be the last time Judy Wong-Page, who is manager, I always get these titles mixed up. You're manager of aquatic and fitness. And after 33 years of service, Judy is retiring from the city. And her career began back in, I think it was 1990. I got that straight. And 1990 would have been, actually, that was almost my last year when I was on council as an alderman. But anyways, kind of full circle, Judy began working as a recreational research analyst, and she did an analysis. I actually can remember coming to council at the time I was on council. It had to do with putting a slide into what was in the Brand Aquatic Center. And it kind of full circle, she ends her career at the city looking again at the slide. I guess things in life do fully go for full circle. And so Judy has had a very full and complete career with the city, as many members of her family have and continue to be with the city. And I just want to wish you, in fact, I'm jealous now, Judy. I'm reading about you going around the world. Sounds like some kind of long cruise. And so we wish you the best on behalf of City Council and the Mayor's office. And I hope you have a very rewarding retirement. And thank you very much for your service with the city.
Thank you so much for that, Mayor.
And I'm sorry I won't be at the retirement party on Friday. I have a seminar in Brampton to go to that day. And coming back from Brampton is usually like 3 hours. So my second question this item has to do with fees. And whenever this comes up every year, it always gives me a headache because there's 100 pages of, I don't know how many fees we have, but it's got a total almost 1,000 different fees. And so when I go through it, it's like your head just spins trying to look at all the various fees. It's not all the same. Some aren't increasing, some are increasing by different amounts. But if it seems to be that there is a theme, and that is 2.25% on a lot of the fee increases, and wondering what is the basis for that? I assume it's inflation, but how did you pick 2.25?
Through you, Chair, to the Mayor. The 2.25% is actually an average over the 4 years. So this is a 4-year fees and charges bylaw that we're passing to cover the fees for 2024 through 2027 for the multi-year budget. Per our guidelines that we sent out to staff, we looked at inflation rates, trying to assume what they're going to be, looking at Bank of Canada, looking at the Ontario budget of what everybody was anticipating for those years. So we were anticipating a 3% inflation rate in 2024, and then getting back to normal to a 2% inflation rate for 25, 26, and 27. So when you average that over the 4 years, it averages out to a 2.25% increase. And that's the numbers that you see reflected in here is that average.
Right. And so for each one of these fees, and there are many different departments, there's a process that's followed. The staff in that department do an analysis of demand, what our competitors are charging. So there's a fairly complete assessment. And in some cases, the decision is zero. In other cases, it's more than the 2.25%. And so that leads me to one question I have about the airport and the hangar fees. I mean, we keep hearing that there's a big, long list of people who want hangar fees. So that strikes me as an area where the demand is obviously greatly exceeds the supply. And thus, is that something where the market's telling us that perhaps we should be increasing the rates by more than the rate of inflation?
Sarah Monroe, Director of Economic Development, Tourism and Cultural Initiatives, through the chair to Mayor Davis. Yes, we have assessed these fees for right now, and they are a little bit lower than they should be. We'll be bringing forward a recommendation to increase the fees based on supply and demand through the estimates committee cycle. So they will be increased in the new year.
Is there something else you can do, Judy, to help us going through these fees? And what I'm getting at is, can you, in a spreadsheet, I know you've organized this in the spreadsheet based on departments, and right, that you group them together. Like, for example, the recreation fees are grouped together in golfing. But would you be able to give us a spreadsheet showing those increases proposed and grouping it not by department, but these are the increases that are more than 2.25%, the average, right? And those that are 0%. And that way, like trying to look through 100 pages of this, it really, like it melts your mind as you go through it, right? It's like, it really is a lot of detail and hard to do as a council member. Would that be possible prior to council?
Through the chair to you, Mayor, yes, that's definitely something that we'd be able to do quite easily, and we can present that to you before council.
Yeah, I'd really appreciate it. It's really taking those fee increases that are a bit of outlier in terms of what's being done on average. I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to staff. The mayor beat me to it on the airport question, which has been a little bit of a repeated theme at council over the last few months. My question is around the waiving of the fees for certain, we'll call it events or facility rentals. Now, I realize one of the, I guess, responses that I've got is that it falls under the fees and services bylaw, but is there anything in the bylaw that can be written that we can waive the fees for a certain event? Or a procedure to do that, maybe, is a better question.
Through the chair to Councillor Hunt, there are opportunities that we can provide some additional ways for council to be able to waive the fees. So we can actually include it in our bylaw as part of our bylaw. We were looking at doing that, but we do also realize that we're going to have additions to our bylaw later this year. So we're just finalizing those procedures, looking at what other municipalities do to be able to provide us with the proper legal wording to be in our bylaw. But at the same time, council can pass a resolution to waive a fee at any time that they wish by way of a resolution.
Which now we have to wait till estimates for that to happen. and yet the organizer pays to rent the pavilion. And I had committed to looking into how we could potentially waive the fees for that particular community event.
Through the chair to Councillor Hunt, we can definitely look into that for you and get back to you with some options.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
May I have a mover and a second to put the item on the floor? Moved by Councillor Caputo. Seconded by Mayor Davis. Any further discussion? Seeing none, call the vote.
All those in favor? Thank you. That item carries.
Councillor Caputo, I believe you called for 5.2.5 to be separated.
Thank you, Chair. This one, I guess I want to get some information a little bit more, get some feedback. This one hurts me a little bit only because of the fact that I understand the costs are going up, but Millards has been a great community partner for the city of Brantford for so many years. And just looking at the fact that if this does go out, unless another local accounting firm comes in, I'd hate to take away a local business from doing business with the city and the corporation of the city of Brantford. So I certainly don't want to end up in another situation like we've been in with another corporate partner that we're fighting with right now, our lives, to try to keep into this city and ensure that that's there. So I guess my question would have been, and I was asking before, do I need to make an amendment if I decided if this was to not go to tender?
That would be correct.
And before I do that, if I can just get staff Joelle to just maybe try to talk me out of this?
Through you, Chair Sullivan, to Councillor Caputo. You know, it really comes from a staff recommendation that we always want to champion a competitive process with respect to procurement of any goods and services that the city is acquiring to ensure the best price, the best value. Certainly in this situation, there are other firms that can do external municipal audit work, and that really led to the staff recommendation to go out competitively for this process because we always champion that process and recommend to all other departments as much as possible to also follow that process. We do understand sort of some of the underlying feelings in this regard. We understand direction received from previous councils, not this term, but previous councils with respect to this matter too. Certainly that's why in the body of the report, we did provide an alternate recommendation if that's what council wished. But certainly a competitive process will always be the staff recommendation.
Thank you.
All right, may I have a mover and second to put the item on the floor for discussion? No. Moved by Mayor Davis, seconded by Councillor Caputo. The item itself. So, yes. Any further? Councillor Hunt.
I guess my feeling is that as a new councillor, have the previous recommendation, I'm assuming has been to send it out to tender.
Through you, Chair, we have not been out for tender for external audit services since 2013, I believe. Ultimately, that RFP was canceled, awarded to the current provider. Then a process established where we would bring this report in the first year of each new council to determine the approach for a selection of the auditor for the next council term or this current council term. And it's been the decision of the previous two councils to award a 4-year contract to Millars.
So the fact that it has not been put out for tender and given the amount of it, I certainly would, I would be more comfortable on the side of the staff recommendation.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, call the vote.
All those in favor? Thank you. The item carries.
Mayor Davis, I believe you asked for 5.3.1 to be separated.
Yes, I did, and I have a question. Going through the list of the various reserve funds. And so if a reserve fund shows a closing balance in the red, does that mean the plan is to drive that reserve fund into a deficit position?
Through the chair to you, Mayor Davis. Yes, that's correct. Currently the only reserve funds that would go into a deficit position are our development charge reserve funds.
Yeah.
So if you recall, our development charges were allowed to basically overspend those development charges, which would borrow from other development charge reserve funds. Then they would pay interest back and forth to each other to make sure that collectively as a group, they still remain whole and they remain in a positive balance. But this allows us to still continue to collect those development charges from developers in the future to then go back and make those reserves whole again.
And in the future, can the reserve to which the funds were transferred, so that reserve fund then pays interest to the other reserve fund? Is that the idea?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
Okay, so it's treated like a kind of an internal loan. All right. And the two reserve funds that are being established, so that money is, I think it's 100,000 in total. It's 50,000 for each of them.
Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
Yeah, one of them being the downtown safety facade improvement program, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, and that money we allocated in the budget. So that money's already there to just needs a reserve fund to park the funds.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And I think I've said this before when we've looked at these reserve funds, but we hear that the Minister of Municipal Affairs is doing these various audits. They've started with Toronto and I think Brampton and Mississauga. And frankly, I would invite the provincial government to come in here and do an audit of these funds, because they're going to find that these funds are, I think, very well managed. And if anything, I think we're in the skimpy end. It's like when I read these reserve funds and the balances we have deposited both in the mandatory and discretionary, I'm a little bit concerned that it doesn't strike me that there's a lot of excess money sitting in any of these reserve funds, and all of it is going to be used properly and the purpose for which it was intended. And frankly, I'd be more comfortable if there was more money in these reserves, but we can't wish upon a falling star and money shows up. So what is your assessment of the general status of our reserve funds? Either you or Joelle.
Through the chair to Mayor Davis, we did go out to our comparator group. It is in the body of the report, with respect to our non-obligatory reserves and reserve funds. So that's what that means, is really any of our reserves or reserve funds which we're not legislatively required to provide for a very specific service. So this doesn't include development charges. This doesn't include gas tax. So really more of our discretionary type reserve funds. And, when we look at it in totality, we're doing okay. But when we really get into the details of our rate versus our non-rate reserves, it does show in the table that we are at the low end of our comparator group with respect to the amount we're holding in reserves, discretionary reserves for those tax supported services. And, back in the casino presentation, staff had supported continued casino allocations towards capital to be able to fund our future tax supported capital, our very well documented capital funding deficit through our asset management plans. It's definitely something we want to achieve as well, is putting more money into reserves for those purposes. Certainly something we'll be looking at as we start to plan our multi-year capital budget, and moving forward in that process is the need to reestablish sort of a capital specific levy as part of the operating budget as well. And hopefully that will get us more in line and better prepared, with our comparator group.
Yeah, and that's probably going to be difficult to do given the various demands that are upon us and potential projects. But, I would hope, looking beyond the term of this council and the next council, when we're no longer paying that equalization stabilization amount to the county, but $1.2 million, that a large portion of that, assuming everything else remains static in these casino proceeds, that the long range plan would be a large portion of those funds would go into the capital reserves to replenish them at that point. Maybe I'll be here then, maybe I won't.
All right, call the vote.
Thank you. All those in favor? And that item carried.
All right, we have no resolutions, no notices, motions. We are adjourned.